So Moolaadé here was a movie that I was a little nervous about watching because I just figured it would be gut-wrenching and a horrible depiction of female genital mutilation in Africa, and just, like, you're just crying and it's a disaster. And while a lot of those things are true, the film itself is surprisingly watchable.
Yeah.
And a lot of this stuff is it's not that it's taken lightly, but it's so commonplace within their culture, and they don't view it the way that outsiders maybe view it, as this horribly oppressive form of child abuse and torture. They see it more as like a cultural decision. And when you see how cavalier they are when discussing cutting the girls, or actually as they call it throughout the film, purification, they got to get purified. And it seems like, how could any culture think like this or do this without thinking, and do it for no reason and just do it for years? I'm like, well, you know what? While it's not as cruel, we have been circumcising men in the United States for no reason for decades. It's the same thing. There's no reason for it. Now, again, it's not as traumatic because it's done younger and it doesn't have the same consequences. So I'm not trying.
And it's not it's not as damaging. There's not as many.
Right.
There's not like the crazy health issues.
So I don't want to equate the two, but as far as the mindset that goes into doing something to young children's genitals because you feel it's justified, but it's really not. That's kind of the parallel I'm making.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought too that it was going to be, and I didn't know anything about this movie before going in, but I was expecting it, and I'm glad that it wasn't. But I expected it to be more like visceral and gruesome.
Oh, right.
But you don't actually. I mean, you don't. It's almost like they shot around it.
Yes.
Like they showed the ceremony a couple times, but it was always from like relatively far away, and it's always there's the blocking is such that you aren't actually seeing what's going on,
or it's enough before or enough after.
You certainly know what's going on,
right?
Yeah, which I appreciated because I didn't want to.
And I want to say, and honestly, in general too, I want to say this. I mean, this is going to be a little awkward because neither of us are women or gynecologists. So part of me feels like it's almost even not our place to talk about this.
Right. It's definitely not our place to like speculate on it too much. But I do think that it's definitely something that I think is important to be touched on and brought to bring up the conversation about it.
Right.
We don't purport to be experts on this or anything.
Right.
And in fact, this might be the subject that I am least qualified to talk about and know the least about probably in this whole series.
Right. And maybe we need to see this more as an advocacy episode to kind of raise awareness. Again, because the statistics are crazy when you're talking about 200 million women worldwide that have either been victims of this or at risk of being victims of this. And again, that's roughly 5% of the women in the world. And it actually affects more than you think. It's not just a Muslim problem. It's just not just an African problem. It is mostly concentrated in Northern Africa and into the Middle East. But I saw a video on YouTube of like, oh, here's a white woman from Wisconsin who had it done in the 60s. And so it's a thing.
That was another thing where it was, it's usually framed as an African issue, at least that's how it was in my mind.
Well, statistically, it primarily is, but it happens everywhere.
Yeah, but it is, right, it is an issue everywhere, yeah.
So let's talk about the film itself, and then we can get to kind of some of the misconceptions. And again, we don't need to go. It's kind of, again, I'm still kind of torn because I don't think we need to go into graphic detail, but at the same time, I think you want to normalize these conversations, and so they're not considered as taboo to even have these conversations. So
right,
the film itself is set in Burkina Faso, in West Africa. So this is part of French West Africa. And you actually kind of, I don't know if you caught it, you could hear a lot of times, most of the time they're speaking their tribal languages, but a few times they're speaking French. And sometimes it's kind of a hybrid.
It's like there's certain, because they, because so their main language that they speak is a tribal language, but because they are Burkina Faso used to be a French colony, and because they're Muslim, they also slip in Arabic and they slip in French.
Oh, right,
so
right.
There's
They're doing the Arabic greetings, right.
Yeah.
And let's see. So the country itself, this is the country where I have heard of the country before, but if I were to write down a list of every country I could think of, I was never going to remember Burkina Faso. I'd heard of it, but I had forgotten that I had heard of it. And it used to be called Upper Volta, or French Upper Volta, and they renamed it not actually too long ago. In the 1984, they renamed it to Burkina Faso. And it is completely landlocked there in Africa. It is a predominantly Muslim country, and we are dealing with a small village or tribe today. And frankly, so I have it here in 2004 in our timeline because that's when the film was made, but it doesn't actually say, and it could be set in the 80s because the radios that all the women have, they get confiscated from them at one point, seem to be pretty dated, but it's also a poor enough part of the world that, hey, this just might be the best radios they could get in 2000 radios from the late 80s, early 90s. So I don't know when it's set. We're just kind of putting it here in our timeline because I think that's an okay place to put it and doesn't seem necessarily out of place. And this is still an issue to the present day. I actually looked just this year, at time of recording, in 2020, Sudan did finally outlaw female genital mutilation, or FGM. It's often just called FGM because that is kind of a lot to kind of say over and over again. So we might just call it FGM here too. So, but yeah, it's still an issue, and I think a lot of countries have illegalized it because it's such a cultural practice. It's hard to, even if you've made it illegal, it's hard to monitor or police, or again, you end up with it's being done anyway, even if the doctors won't officially do it.
Should we, before we get too much into the rest of this, should we maybe just explain what FGM is?
Yes. So
again, like you said, not to get too graphically violent about it, but just in medical terms.
But there are misconceptions. I watched a TED Talk this morning about kind of a lot of the misconceptions about it, and
okay.
So it kind of talked about, most people seem to think that, it's all one thing, or all the women who have it done have a very common experience, but it's a completely diverse practice. Sometimes it's happened shortly after birth, sometimes it's right before puberty, sometimes even later than that, and that also even what is done to the women varies widely
sometimes
too.
It's more. Sometimes there's no anesthesia. Sometimes it's local anesthetic. Sometimes it's like it's in a hospital as it's an actual surgery.
Right.
Versus just some sort of like a primitive just hack and slash.
Right.
It's essentially at the core of what it is it's just removal of part or all of female genitalia. Is that a pretty good just base description of it?
Yes. So yes, primarily it is most often the clitoris, or specifically keep in mind the head of the clitoris, because it's a gland that exists well beyond just the head. And then also, sometimes they will literally, again, I don't like to say, but they'll slice off the labia as well in some instances. Mm-hmm. Or in other instances, it can be a closing up of the vagina through either sewing it together and just literally trying to make it a smaller opening, and just, again, there's all and every combination thereof. So that's kind of about all we want to kind of get into on that. But then the ramifications just become, anywhere from, the obvious, but then less obvious is difficult in urination, or then years later giving birth, and you have scar tissue built up, and it's just, actually, even the white woman I saw the YouTube video about, she had difficult childbirth because of scar tissue that obviously isn't designed to be conducive to childbirth.
Well, in the movie, the main lady, is it Cole?
Cole, yeah.
Yeah, so she talks about how she had 2 previous pregnancies and miscarried. Both of her babies died, and the only reason that her daughter in the movie, that she chose to not be quote purified, The only reason that she was able to survive being born is because she had a C-section.
Right, and a pretty brutal one where she has like a vertical scar up to her navel.
Yep.
And
Yep.
they just ripped her out of her. And a lot of it's very dangerous within their tribe too, because so theirs is more of like a semi-religious ceremony performed by women in the tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And I did listen to a podcast where, and I couldn't find it again I couldn't remember what podcast it was, but basically a woman was talking about how it's not. So yes, it does ultimately go back to controlling women and trying to make sex not pleasurable and just make them make sure they're pure for their husbands. That is kind of ultimately the roots of it. But it's been around for so long that part of it has almost even fallen away. And with this tribe specifically in the film, they just say that's how it's supposed to be. Like, it's not even, it's not about anything. It's just the norm. And so we're going to keep doing it because it's the norm. And how dare you get rid of our tradition, or how dare you make these women impure for marriage and unfit for marriage? And it has nothing to do with anything other than tradition and culture. And that's anyways on the podcast. That's what she talked about. Is like that's part of the frustration. Is it's just about educating these tribes, educating these people that it's not actually necessary. They're convinced that it's necessary.
Right. Well, they're convinced that it's necessary, and the elders also are. They push. Hey, this is how we've always done it. But then they also push with it's required by Islam. And one of the things that she says is, no, it's not, because I heard on the radio, the Grand Imam said that it's not.
Right.
He came on the radio, and he's an expert in Islam, and he said that it's not required. So
right. And they're right. It's not. It's not mentioned in any religious text or anything. It just kind of culturally came up as a way to control women. And again, another one of the YouTube videos I was watching talked about how, again, everyone's experience is differently. There's even been instances where women who have had their vaginal canal sewn to be a smaller opening, then have to have it opened up to give birth, will ask, well, then you need to sew it back up after birth. Like, so they basically want to have the damage redone because, again, they think you're supposed to have it. They actually think that a closed up vagina is healthier and that they're going to be more prone to infection if they haven't had this mutilation done to them. So again, it's just kind of fighting the misconceptions and to help slowly get rid of this problem.
One of the things that I think was interesting in this movie is that it kind of shows that, for lack of a better term, ignorance as both a positive and a negative. So, like, obviously it's the source of the conflict, but it's also the thing that is keeping the girl safe because she puts it's just a rope. It's like 2 feet off the ground. And she said, this is the Moolaadé, the magical protection. You can't come into my house. Otherwise, you're going to be cursed.
I actually loved that mechanism within the film.
And they, like, that's what kept everyone out for the whole movie.
Right. And
they said, well, we can't go in because she's got the Moolaadé, so they're protected. No matter how much we hate it, no matter how much we want to get those girls back.
Right, they're absolutely convinced that only Kole can lift the Moolaadé, and to the point that, kind of jumping to the end, where her husband's literally whipping her so that she'll say the word that relieves the curse of the Moolaadé and allow them to get the girls to, again, quote, purify them. And it's interesting, too, and this seemed to be based in fact that you kind of have this amalgamation of these African tribal communities that are Islamic, but then they also have these rich cultural traditions of superstitions and tribal superstitions, and it's kind of this blend. So yeah, they're fully Muslim, but they also fully believe in these curses and in Kole's ability to put these curses in place. And like, oh yeah, the last person that broke the curse, they ended up dead. Like, it's just like it's legit. So the whole plot of the film is these. It's like 6 at first, but 4 girls go to Kole and say, hey, we're up next to get purified. Will you protect us?
And we don't want to.
Right. Obviously, yeah. So, and we don't want to be purified, so you're the only one who will protect us because 7 years ago, you didn't let them purify your daughter. So your daughter, and they even have a term for it. I forget what it was, but basically they have a term for women who haven't been purified, which again, we're only using the word because that's the word they use in the film, but haven't undergone FGM. So they want her protection because, again, they basically range in age from probably 07 to 11, and they want her protection. She does say, yep, you're right. I don't agree with the practice despite our traditions. So I'll set up this little rope across my house entrance and no one can cross without dying if they want to try to claim you. But you girls also can't leave because you would be killed by the Moolaadé also. So I love the concept that the title of the movie is the name of the curse that she's put in place to protect the girls. And I just thought that was a really neat, it wasn't at all what I expected the title to mean. And I thought that was kind of fascinating. And then so throughout, it's just kind of then the debate within the community of what are we going to do about Cole, who's preventing the girls from having this, again, what they see culturally as vital, that none of these girls are going to be able to get married. No one will ever want them, that you're going against your tradition. You're going to make, again, they've tied it to Islam somehow, so you're going to make Allah mad that you're not allowing this practice to continue, and it ends up being just kind of back and forth. It's not even really a debate. There are more women, I guess, that ultimately come to Cole's side, and actually after her husband beats her, kind of a lot more come into play. And a lot of it's just the life in this village. You just kind of get to see life in this African village. And it's kind of interesting with the one guy who's been over in France going to school, and he comes back and he's got a suit and brand new bills. They're used to all the French bills. France is where the money is made, but they're used to all these worn out banknotes. And this guy's got new banknotes.
And the guy that they call mercenary, who's like the former soldier who got kicked out of the army for, exposing corruption in their commanders, and then they kicked him out of the army, and now he's like the guy that sells bread and knickknacks and everything. And stuff.
He's Walmart in their community. Yeah.
Right. He's like Walmart, but it's like a bike cart that he just carries everything.
No, sorry, right. He's a farmer's market Walmart. He just kind of has everything.
And then he ends up getting killed by the villagers because the kid from France says, "Oh, well, my family wants me to marry my 11-year-old cousin," and he says, so your family's pedophiles then?"
Right.
And then they're like, "Well, we're going to kill you because."
Well, that's not why they kill him. I guess that's one of the reasons. Maybe they kill him because he stops Cole's husband from beating her.
Oh, that's right. He grabs the husband when he's whipping Cole.
Right, and the guy mercenary, he's actually a very, very interesting character because he's kind of not, he doesn't really follow the same rules as the rest of the community. So the rest of them are all about more like traditional. You get married, we're monogamous. You marry the purified girls. Mercenary is more of just like, hey, he's always flirting with all the girls. He wouldn't mind sleeping with all.
There's like multiple characters call him a womanizer. Yes. And he's like, he like flirts with like the different girls that'll come up to his cart.
Right.
And stuff.
Right. But he's also ultimate. So he seems like kind of a, even not a complete sleazebag, but he's the least moral person on paper within their community. But then he's the one that steps up. Yeah, I found Mercenary just a very interesting character that was handled well within the film, where he kind of goes from because he also is not exploiting completely, but he's kind of price gouging a little bit the community, and the guy who's just come back from France is kind of calling him out on it because he knows what stuff costs in the West. But Mercenary does point out, well, hey, it's a little harder to get stuff down here. I got to pay for the shipping and all that. But he's also doing it with a smile, so it says like, yeah, dude, I'm making bank.
Yeah, that was like such an interesting dynamic between the two of them, because like they were smiling and laughing and joking, but then in the next sentence, like Mercenary's calling his uncle and his dad pedophiles, and then he's coming back with, well, you're robbing these people blind, like, this stuff doesn't cost this much. But then at the end of their conversations, like, they're back to being homies again almost. Or they at least, even if they're not friends, they have an understanding of each other.
I did think it wasn't necessarily handled the best in how they kind of end up killing it. So we do see him getting kind of run out of town, packing up all his stuff. And the guys are kind of going after him, but I just kind of assumed they were just making sure he left. And then the next day, when the lady's talking to Cole, as they're dealing with her whip injuries and kind of treating her for that, she just kind of casually mentions that, oh yeah, and they murdered Mercenary. Like, oh, they did?
Well, yeah, because they chased him out. He's visibly distressed. They're chasing him out with the mask, and they have torches and masks, and he's like running out of town, and all the stuff's falling out of his cart. And then it cuts to the next shot was the circling vultures.
Oh, I missed that. Nice. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So there was like, I think it was like their way of showing that they killed him.
The other bombs that they drop is the woman also says that one of the girls Coley had been protecting, basically in the chaos of everything, both Coley's getting whipped and Mercenary getting run out of town. In the chaos, they grabbed one of the girls and then ended up, performing FGM, and she died. Because again, that's one of the big risks is the bleeding out.
Yeah, and that's almost like the last straw, because the mom was the one who basically coaxes the girl out and then takes her to the ceremony where they do FGM, and then the kid dies, and then the mom comes back just distraught and says, "I never should have done that. No one should ever have to go through this. I was on the one side of the issue, and now I'm on the completely opposite side."
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that conversation kind of it almost fans the flame then in the rest of the group of women there to say, hey, we need to stand up and do something. And then that's when they all come out and they confront the men, and they confront their religious group of women that is performing the ceremonies, and they have, they come out with their machetes and stuff, and they take all their knives away and basically say, we're not going to do this anymore.
Yeah, and that's where it seems a little odd too, in that so this tribe that was willing to just kill Mercenary then basically lets the women have their way. They're basically just kind of saying they're still kind of berating them, and they know that Cole is the one kind of instigating this kind of revolt that the women are kind of having, and the one guy, it'd be Cole's brother-in-law is telling her husband, "You got to get your wife under control." And then ultimately, Cole's husband just says, "You know what? Forget it. You don't tell me how to deal with my wife. She's doing fine." And you kind of get the feeling that this tribe is now going to shift away from it, and it's kind of ultimately a victory that they're willing to put this behind them to protect their girls going forward, and that the tradition isn't as important as the well-being of the women in the tribe. And so it's kind of a little minor victory.
Yeah, but then it's also like very, very quickly juxtaposed though with the shots of the smoke coming up from the burning radios.
And
which it's almost like, when you there's movies where it's like, it's kind of like something bad happens, but there's like this glimmer of hope that gives you like hope for the future. It's almost like the opposite of that. It's like, okay, like they have this big victory. They accomplished what they wanted to, they ended FGM, or at least for their tribe, but then the last shot is the smoke rising up from all the burning radios. Like, okay, but like this is now their communication to the outside world is cut off, and
aesthetically this was a very interesting movie. In the tribe is obviously this village itself is this kind of like red stone and red dirt with everything they've built out of, and they even have like a mosque that's built to almost look like a termite mound itself, and then has like these spikes sticking out of it.
Yeah, which I thought it is a kind of a cool looking thing, and they talk about it too. That one village elder talks about, well, when the ancient ancestors moved here, like the founder of our tribe died, and they buried him, and this termite mound sprang up. Then when the tribe converted to Islam, they built the mosque next to this giant termite mound that's like this important cultural thing for our people, and they built the mosque to look like the termite mound.
Yeah, and everyone's wearing these kind of bright colored clothing, and then the shot that is just really, really neat then. So then set against all that, you have, as they confiscate the women's radios because they feel like they've been corrupted by the modern media or the Western influences, and so they confiscate all the women's radios and pile them up kind of in the village square there with all this, red dirt buildings in the background. And it's also neat how they don't turn them off. So it's this pile of radios that are on.
Yeah.
And they just kind of constantly show that shot.
Yeah. They show shots throughout the movie of like, another husband will put a radio on, another guy will put a radio on. And it happens a few times throughout the movie. And each time it's this weird, I don't know if eerie is the right word, but it's definitely an interesting sound. This pile of radios that are all on, all playing different things all the time.
It was a very well-made movie. It was a little rough though, since we watched it on YouTube and the translation was rough. But I didn't put that on the filmmaker. That seemed to be like it was just the YouTube internal thing. Yeah.
Right. Which, obviously whoever did it, they know more about language than I probably ever will. But at the same time, some of the subtitles, they would say stuff that just didn't make sense, or it would, maybe they're whatever they're saying, the direct translation doesn't make sense, but
So we get the literal translation, right?
we were getting the literal translation. It's like I don't understand what they're talking about,
Right.
but you do get the general
Right. It wasn't a
on.
big problem. It sounds like something that could be a big problem, but I'd still say it's very much worth watching. It's a really good movie.
Especially because you can watch it for free on YouTube.
Yes.
And I think let's just
clarify
say
that.
that
Qualify that.
we don't know 100% whether, what the copyright,
Right. It's in this weird gray
how
area.
that works. But like the copy that I watched, it had been up for a while and it had like tens of thousands of views.
Right.
So
it looks like the only other way to watch it would be to buy the DVD.
Right. Right. And so YouTube, at least in our finding, was the only place that we were able to watch it
Digitally, right.
like even on Amazon or it's not on Netflix, even on like Amazon Prime, the only way that you could watch it is to actually buy the DVD. But the version that we watched was on YouTube, and it had been up for a while too.
I think over 3 years. Yeah. Yeah, the film is a 99% on Rotten Tomatoes on the critics side. And I'm actually kind of surprised that it wasn't nominated for the Oscar for Best Foreign Film. But we've talked about many times before how sometimes stuff just straight up gets missed. So it must have got missed. It is even a 7.6 on IMDb. So it's a really, really good movie about a topic that still far too few people are even aware is an issue in the world still today. And it does sound like it's getting better. There's a lot of advocacy towards educating these tribes to get rid of this practice. And again, a lot of it is, it's not just punitive. It's they don't know any better. And that wouldn't get rid of all of it, but I think just education will go a long way towards severely neutralizing the problem, even if we can't get to a total elimination anytime soon.
Right. Yeah. So just looking on YouTube, the copy that I watched, it was put on in two parts. They've both been up for 3 years.
Right.
The first part has almost 7,000 views, and the second part, which I don't know how this works, the second part has almost 8,000 views. And then there's another copy on here that's been up here that's been on YouTube for 6 years and has 400,000 views with Spanish subtitles.
Okay.
And then there's another one here it's a playlist in 11 parts, but it's been up since 2012, so it's been up for 8 years, and there's 11,000 views on these videos. So if it's not supposed to be on YouTube, nobody seems to care. I guess is what I should say.
I guess ultimately the answer we should say is support the filmmakers and buy the DVD, I guess should be the answer. I mentioned before that, or actually my very first episode, that the whole goal was to only do movies that are available digitally online. So we did kind of talk about this was in a gray area, but we did think it was an important enough topic and a good enough movie on the reviews that we wanted to make sure we included it.
Yeah.
Okay, so next week we will move to Saudi Arabia with the 2012 film Wajah.